In 133 BC, a Roman politician stood before the people and said, "The wild beasts that roam over Italy have their dens and holes to lurk in, but the men who fight and die for Italy enjoy the common air and light and nothing else." 6 months later, he was beaten to death in the streets of Rome. His crime? Trying to give land back to Roman citizens who had fought and suffered for the Republic. His name was Tiberius Gracchus. His brother Gaius tried to finish what he started. 10 years later, he was hunted down and he ultimately took his own life. 3,000 of his supporters were executed without trial. And Rome never recovered. Within a century, the Republic collapsed. Within 3 centuries, the empire was in terminal decline. This exact pattern, societies restricting property rights, locking citizens out of ownership, concentrating land in fewer and fewer hands, has repeated itself across civilization after civilization. And in nearly every case, it creates instability. Sometimes revolution, sometimes slow decline, but instability nonetheless. France in 1789, Russia in 1917, Weimar Germany, more recently, Venezuela and Zimbabwe. The technology changes, the details evolve, but the core pattern remains remarkably consistent. And right now, in 2025, we are seeing some similar warning signs. Housing prices have completely decoupled from wages. Home ownership rates are falling for entire generations. Institutional investors are buying up single-family homes at unprecedented scale. The Gracchi brothers tried to address Rome's version of this crisis. The Senate opposed them violently. And that decision, to protect concentrated land ownership above all else, set in motion events that ultimately destroyed the Republic and destroyed the Senate. So if you want to understand why property rights matter, why giving citizens a real stake in their nation isn't just nice policy, but potentially existential, you need to understand what happened in Rome 2,000 years ago. Because history doesn't repeat exactly, but it often rhymes. And right now, we might be hearing some familiar echoes. Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus were not radicals or revolutionaries. They were born into Roman privilege, sons of a celebrated general and consul. Their mother Cornelia was the daughter of Scipio Africanus, the man who defeated the feared and hated Hannibal. They had every reason to play the political game as it existed. They could have been comfortable, wealthy senators living off their estates. But what they saw disturbed them deeply. By the 2nd century BC, Rome had conquered most of the Mediterranean. Wealth was pouring in, but so was inequality at an accelerating rate. Here's what was happening. Ordinary Roman soldiers, small landowners who had left their farms to fight on behalf of the Republic, on behalf of their nation, were returning home to find their land had been absorbed by the elite. These small farms were being consolidated into massive estates called latifundia, worked primarily by enslaved people captured in Rome's wars. The Roman economy, in effect, was cannibalizing its own middle class. And this wasn't just economically problematic, it was constitutionally dangerous. Rome's military strength had always rested on citizen soldiers who owned land. Property ownership gave them a stake in defending the Republic. But now, you had landless veterans wandering Italy with their families, while senators accumulated estates the size of small cities. So in 133 BC, Tiberius was elected tribune of the plebs, a position designed to protect common citizens from aristocratic abuse. He proposed something that sounds radical, but actually wasn't. Enforce the existing legal limit on how much public land that belonged to the Roman people, any individual could control. The law already existed, it just hadn't been enforced in generations. His proposal was to redistribute the surplus public land to landless citizens, give Roman veterans, the men who'd fought for the Republic, a piece of what they had defended. To most Romans, this seemed very reasonable, but to the Senate, the conservative landowning class, it was an existential crisis. Because land was not just wealth in Rome, it was power, political power, societal status, economic control. And Tiberius's proposal threatened to shift that balance. So how did the Senate respond? They fought him ruthlessly. They used procedural tactics. They spread rumors that he wanted to become a tyrant. They accused him of attacking Roman traditions. And when those tactics failed, Tiberius did something controversial. He bypassed the Senate entirely and took the law directly to the popular assembly, and the people passed it overwhelmingly. Now, the Senate was furious, and when Tiberius announced he'd run for re-election as tribune, seen by many as violating Roman custom, they made their move. Here's what happened. During the election, a mob of senators and their supporters attacked Tiberius and his followers. Tiberius was beaten to death with wooden clubs and chair legs. 300 of his supporters died with him. Their bodies were thrown into the Tiber River like criminals, denied proper burial. This was the first political violence in Rome's 400-year Republican history, and it would not be the last. 10 years later, Gaius Gracchus, Tiberius' younger brother, was elected tribune, and he picked up where his brother left off, but he went even further. He revived the land reforms. He pushed for subsidized grain to feed the urban poor. He proposed extending citizenship rights to Rome's Italian allies. He restructured provincial governance to reduce corruption. He was brilliant, charismatic, and extremely popular with the common people, which made him very dangerous to the Senate. The Senate passed the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, basically martial law, giving the consuls emergency powers to, air quotes, protect the Republic. It was in practice a license to eliminate political opponents. Gaius was hunted down. Facing capture, he took his own life, and over 3,000 of his followers were subsequently executed without trial. The deaths of the Gracchi brothers mark a turning point. Rome had always been a republic of laws, debate, negotiation, and compromise. But with the elimination of the Gracchi, Rome crossed a line from political competition to political violence as an accepted tool. What followed was a slow-motion unraveling of everything that the Roman people had fought for hundreds of years. Class conflict intensified dramatically. Strong men like Marius and Sulla rose to power, backed by private armies. Civil war became normalized rather than unthinkable. Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon a few decades later, effectively ending the Republic. And it all started with land. The refusal to reform land ownership, to give ordinary Roman citizens a meaningful stake in the Republic's future, planted seeds that eventually destroyed Rome. Now, this isn't just the Roman Empire and the Roman Republic we're talking about. And what happened with the Gracchi is not unique. It is a pattern that shows up across civilizations when property rights become too concentrated or too restricted. Let me show you. Fast forward a few centuries, Rome had survived the crisis of the Republic and transformed into an empire. But the property problem never got solved. It got worse. By the 3rd century AD, the colonized system had emerged, essentially debt bondage. Free farmers became tied to the land they worked, unable to leave, passing their obligations to their children. The Roman middle class of small landowners effectively disappeared. And here's the critical part. When the barbarian invasions came in the 4th and 5th centuries, something interesting happened. Many Romans simply didn't fight very hard to defend the empire. Why would they? They didn't own anything. The empire becomes something that happened to them, not something they had a stake in. When citizens lose ownership, they stop defending the system. This is a pattern we will see repeated. Now, I want to fast forward to an event that would have critical implications for Western civilization, and it is incredibly almost exact, a very similar story. The Emperor Romanus Diogenes was the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, or as we know it today, the Byzantine Empire. And the Eastern Roman Empire was facing an invasion of the Turkish tribes into Anatolia. Anatolia was the breadbasket of the Eastern Roman Empire. It was very, very important territory. And Anatolia had become depopulated. Why? Same issue. Sprawling estates, controlled by the nobility and the elites, had gradually consumed more and more of the land. I'm going to do a long form episode on this because I just love this story. It's so incredible. But I'm going to tell you guys it now, and then we'll do another one later because it's awesome. The emperor recognized the problem, and he sought to stop the concentration of land ownership into the hands of the few and make sure that the people of the Roman Empire, I'm going to call it the Roman Empire because that's the proper name for it, had a stake in their system. And he attempted to redistribute a lot of this land that was worked by serfs and indentured servants back to the Roman soldiers who fought and defended the Eastern Roman Empire from the invasion. And at the Battle of Manzikert, an incredibly important battle, incredibly important, and it would become obvious in hindsight how important it was, the emperor was betrayed by his own nobility, who didn't like that he was trying to make sure the soldiers had land and a stake in the system. The cavalry, at the critical moment, after a days-long battle against the Turks, in which the Romans gave good comport themselves and fought very hard, the nobility left, the cavalry left, and the Roman army collapsed, and the emperor was captured. Now, what's interesting is the Turkish leader who defeated him treated him with respect. He did the ceremonial, made him kneel and put his feet on him like, "You're my footstool." But then after that was done, they broke bread together, everything was fine. And he released the emperor to return to Constantinople. The nobility received the emperor, blinded him, and threw him down to the river, where he died shortly after of his wounds. And the Turks took Anatolia pretty swiftly after that, and the fate of the Eastern Roman Empire declined from that point onwards. Same issue, property rights. Give people a stake in the system, they fight for it. It is a problem that has plagued every society. I want to jump ahead now to 18th century France. By 1789, approximately 98% of the land was owned by the nobility and the church. Peasants worked land they could never own, paying crushing taxes to a system that gave them nothing in return. The wealth gap had become obscene. French aristocrats were living in unprecedented luxury, while peasants were spending 60 to 80% of their income just on bread. When bread prices spiked due to poor harvest, it wasn't an inconvenience, it was starvation. The result? Revolution, the guillotine, the terror, decades of instability that reshaped Europe, and it all started with a property crisis. Let them eat cake wasn't just callous, it was, in hindsight, a catastrophically dangerous misreading of the situation. And in my opinion, the revolution is a terrible blight on human history, and it led to something really terrible. Now let's talk about an even worse revolution that's even worse on human history. Let's move to early 20th century Russia. Serfs had been freed, air quotes, in 1861, but the land deals they received were often terrible, small plots with crushing redemption payments. And by 1917, Russia had massive inequality. A tiny aristocracy controlled vast estates while millions of peasants worked lands they did not own. And when World War I created additional strain, the Bolsheviks offered a simple promise: peace, land, and bread. And they won. The Romanov dynasty paid with their lives. Russia descended into civil war and eventually totalitarian rule. And as many of us are aware, the Bolsheviks did not uphold their end of the promise, and those serfs ended up in another form of slavery for a long time. Again, the pattern: concentrated property ownership, citizens without stake, followed by revolutionary instability. Let's look at something more recent. In the early 2000s, Venezuela under Hugo Chavez began expropriating private property, farms, businesses, land under the banner of first-century socialism. Property rights collapsed, private ownership became uncertain, investment fled, production collapsed. Today, Venezuela, once one of South America's wealthiest nations, faces extreme poverty. People have left by the millions. It is a humanitarian crisis. The mechanism was different from Rome or France, but the core pattern is the same. When property rights collapse, economic instability follows, and sometimes revolution. Similar story in Zimbabwe in the 2000s. In 2000, Robert Mugabe began fast-tracking land reform, seizing commercial farms and redistributing them. Property rights evaporated overnight. The rule of law became uncertain. Zimbabwe went from being the breadbasket of Africa to facing famine within a few years. Hyperinflation followed. At one point, Zimbabwe was printing 100 trillion, not a misspeak, although I'm prone to do that, $100 trillion notes. Again, destroy property rights, remove people's right and ownership in their land, and watch economic and political stability disintegrate. So where are we today? Now, let me be clear. I am not saying the United States in 2025 is identical to Rome in 133 BC, or France in 1789, or, God forbid, Zimbabwe. We're not. Our political system is different. Our economy is different. We have democratic mechanisms to address problems peacefully. It's part of the genius of the founding fathers. They built a system that has stood the test of many trials. But also keep in mind that our nation is very new, right? The examples that we look at the timeless investor, the Roman Empire, China, any of these great empires have all lasted 2 to 3x longer than we have. So we're in the early innings still. And we should pay attention to some concerning trends. I want to talk about housing affordability crisis in this country. For most of American history, homeownership was the foundation of middle class wealth. It was how families built equity, how they passed something on to their children, and how they felt invested in their communities and their country. But over the past 50 years, and especially the past 20, that has been changing. Since we left the gold standard, home prices have completely decoupled from wages in dramatic fashion. What used to take 3 to 4 years of median income to buy a home now takes 7 to 8 years or more in many markets. Institutional investors now own hundreds of thousands of single family homes, something that would have been unthinkable a generation ago. Younger generations increasingly face a choice: inherit wealth from family or rent forever. Here's why this matters from a societal stability perspective. When people own property, they have skin in the game. I don't think that's controversial to say. They care about their community, they vote, they maintain their homes, they have something to protect and something to pass on. When an entire generation feels locked out of ownership, they stop feeling invested in the system's success. They might not defend it. They might want to change it radically from the left or the right. The early 1900s is a great example of really extreme political philosophies coming to the rise on the heel of severe wealth inequality, property right limitations. I mean, all these kind of things. We're already seeing this in our politics. Populism on both sides, in many ways, is a response to feeling economically left behind, to feeling like the system is against the common person in this country, to feeling like the previous generations had opportunities that are now foreclosed and gone. The Gracchi brothers were not radicals trying to destroy Rome. They were conservatives trying to save Rome by giving citizens a stake in its survival. The Senate killed them for it. They chose to protect their concentrated land holdings rather than strengthen the Republic's foundation, and within a century, the Republic was gone and the Senate was neutered. Here's the question before us. Every society in history that allowed property ownership to become too concentrated, that turned ownership from a broadly accessible right into a privilege for the few, eventually paid a price. Sometimes the price was revolution, sometimes it's slow decline, sometimes it's both, but they all paid. The question isn't whether property rights and broad-based ownership matter. History has answered that question repeatedly, tragically, and decisively. The question is, are we paying attention? And more importantly, are we willing to make course corrections before the pattern repeats itself? The Gracchi bros saw what was coming. They tried to fix it within a system using legal means, appealing to Roman tradition and law, and they were beaten to death for it. And Rome never recovered from that decision. There are many arguments for why the Roman Empire fell and the Roman Republic fell. I'm aware of that. There's a lot of other points behind this, but this is a critical one. And the choice to protect concentrated wealth over broad-based ownership started a chain reaction that within a few generations destroyed the greatest republic the ancient world had produced. We have more tools today than the Gracchi did. We have democratic mechanisms. We have the ability to learn from history. We have time to make adjustments, but only if we recognize the pattern. Broad-based property ownership isn't just about individual wealth, though that matters. It's about social stability. It's about giving citizens a reason to defend and improve their society rather than tear it down or abandon it. The Gracchi understood this 2,000 years ago. The question is, do we, or do we even recognize what's happening? Thank you for watching. If you found this valuable, please like, subscribe, and share. I'm Arie van Gemeren, and this is The Timeless Investor. The wheel turns ever onward. Let's make sure we learn from it this time. Think well, act wisely, build something timeless. Thank you.